You already know what revolutions are, you've read the history, but tonight, we're going deeper. Not what happened, but how it works. Tonight, we'll discover how a crowd becomes a force, how fear flips into power, what creates that exact moment, when a regime that seemed permanent becomes impossible. Tonight we'll understand the pattern, how belief systems hold power in place, and what makes them shatter. We'll trace the psychology of collective awakening, the mechanics of threshold moments, what happens in individual minds when reality shifts. By the time you drift into sleep, you'll see it clearly. Why revolutions work when they do, why they fail when they don't, and what that reveals about power itself. So breathe deeply, let these words wash over you, and prepare to see the machinery beneath history. Before we can understand why revolutions work, we must first understand something that seems paradoxical. Why do they need to happen at all? Picture a pyramid. At the top, one person, a king, a dictator, an emperor. Below that, a small group. Advisors, generals, administrators. Below that, a larger group. Officials, police, soldiers, and at the base, millions. The farmers, the workers, the merchants, the mothers, the fathers, the children. Now here's a question that should keep us awake at night, but instead helps us sleep because we've stopped asking it. Why don't the millions simply walk away? Why don't they stop obeying? Stop working for a system that extracts from them. Stop following orders from people who give nothing back. The king cannot farm his own food. The emperor cannot build his own palace. The dictator cannot police his own people. They need the millions, but the millions don't actually need them. So why do empires stand for centuries? Let's go deeper into the psychology. Imagine you're born in a village in medieval France. From your first breath, you see certain patterns. Your father bows when the Lord passes. Your mother curtsies when the lady appears. The priest tells you God ordained this hierarchy. The teacher explains that order requires obedience. Every story you hear, every lesson you learn, every ritual you observe, all of it reinforces one central idea. This is how things are. This is how things have always been. This is how things must be. By the time you're 10 years old, these patterns aren't ideas you believe. They're the water you swim in. They're the air you breathe. They're so fundamental to your reality that questioning them feels like questioning whether the sky should be blue or whether rocks should be hard. This is socialization, and it's remarkably powerful because humans are tribal creatures. We survived as a species not through individual strength but through cooperation, through following group norms, through fitting in. Children who questioned the tribe's wisdom wandered off and got eaten by predators. Children who obeyed, who learned the rules, who absorbed the culture, those children survived to pass on their genes, so we're born with a deep genetic predisposition to obey authority figures, to follow social norms, to not rock the boat. This isn't weakness, this is evolution. But here's where it gets interesting. Evolution also gave us something else, something that makes revolutions possible. The ability to recognize when the authority figure is leading us off a cliff. The ability to detect unfairness and injustice. The ability to imagine alternative arrangements. These competing impulses live in every human mind. Obey or question, follow or rebel, accept or resist. And most of the time, obedience wins. It's easier, it's safer. It's what everyone else is doing. But sometimes, under certain conditions, the other impulse awakens, Let your breathing slow even more now. Feel your heartbeat steady and calm. This story will carry you through the night gently like a boat on a quiet river. Let's travel now to Boston, 1773. The air is cold. December wind cuts through wool coats and wooden walls. The harbour smells of salt and tar and fish. For years, the American colonists have been growing restless. The British Parliament taxes them, but gives them no representation. The motto spreads, no taxation without representation. But mottos don't make revolutions. Grievances don't make revolutions. Millions of people throughout history have had grievances. They died with those grievances, passed them to their children, who died with them too. So what's different here? On the night of December 16th, about 100 men disguised as Mohawk Indians board 3 British ships in Boston Harbor. They work for hours methodically, breaking open chests of tea, dumping them into the water. 45 tons of tea, worth a fortune. Now, in most times and places, this is where the story ends. The authorities arrive with overwhelming force. The rebels are captured, tortured, executed. Everyone else learns a lesson. Don't resist. But something different happens this time. The British government responds with what they call the coercive acts. Americans call them the intolerable acts. They close Boston Harbor. They revoke Massachusetts' charter. They send more troops. They're trying to make an example, trying to teach a lesson about the cost of resistance. But here's the psychological mistake they make. They assume punishment deters resistance. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it does the opposite. When punishment seems disproportionate, when it seems cruel, when it seems to target not just the guilty but the innocent, something shifts in the public mind. People who were neutral start sympathizing with the rebels. People who were sympathetic start actively supporting them. People who were actively supporting them start willing to die for the cause. The British turned a local incident into a symbolic cause. And symbols are powerful, because symbols tell stories, and humans think in stories. The story of the Boston Tea Party wasn't really about tea. It was about dignity, about respect, about the fundamental question, are we subjects or are we citizens? Are we children to be punished by a stern parent? Or are we adults capable of governing ourselves? Every person in the 13 colonies had to answer that question for themselves, and the British response made the answer clearer. By September 1774, delegates from 12 colonies gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. These weren't radicals, they were lawyers, merchants, landowners, respectable men with much to lose. But they were men who had made a calculation. And this is key to understanding how revolutions work. It's always a calculation. The human mind is constantly weighing costs and benefits. Not consciously always, but the calculation happens. What is the cost of obedience? What is the cost of resistance? What is the likelihood of success? What is the risk of failure? For most of history, for most people, the calculation favors obedience. Resistance is dangerous. Success is unlikely. The cost of failure is death or worse. Better to keep your head down, pay your taxes, bow to the Lord, accept your place. But when conditions change, when the cost of obedience rises, when the likelihood of success increases, when the risk of doing nothing seems as great as the risk of doing something, the calculation shifts. In 1774, many colonists looked at British policy and thought, if we do nothing, this only gets worse. More taxes, more control, more humiliation. Eventually they'll take everything. and they looked at each other and thought, "We're not alone. There are thousands of us, millions across the colonies. What if?" That what if is the seed of every revolution. What if we said no? What if we refused? What if we stopped playing our part in this arrangement? Let these questions settle into your mind now, like stones sinking into still water. Feel your body relaxing deeper, your breath slowing further. Chapter 3: The Contagion of Courage. April 19th, 1775, Lexington Green. Dawn breaks cold and grey. About 70 colonial militia face 700 British regulars. The British commander orders the militia to disperse. They're outgunned, outmanned, outtrained. Logic says, leave, survive. Fight another day if you must, but not here, not now, not like this. But the militia don't leave. Someone fires a shot. History never determines who. And the American Revolution begins not with a declaration or a grand strategy, but with farmers refusing to move. This moment deserves our attention, because these weren't professional soldiers. They were farmers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, men with families waiting at home, men with crops to plant and businesses to run. They had everything to lose and realistically little chance of winning. So why didn't they leave? The answer reveals something profound about human nature. We are not purely rational creatures. We don't always choose the option that maximizes our individual survival. We're also status conscious, dignity driven, reputation aware. Each militiaman on that green was doing a calculation, yes, but not just about British guns versus colonial muskets. They were calculating what their children would think, what their neighbors would say. What story would be told about them? Would they be remembered as the man who stood or the man who fled? In that moment, the cost of leaving, the social cost, the emotional cost, the identity cost, exceeded the cost of staying, even if staying meant dying. This is the engine that drives revolutions forward, not reckless bravery, not suicidal courage, but a careful weighing of different kinds of costs, and a decision that dignity sometimes matters more than safety. Now watch what happens next, because this is where the psychology becomes contagious. News of Lexington spreads, by horseback, by letter, by word of mouth. And everywhere the news reaches, people face the same choice the Lexington militia faced. Join the resistance or stay neutral. Risk everything or risk nothing. Before Lexington, staying neutral was easy. The revolution was theoretical, abstract, something other people might do. But after Lexington, neutrality becomes harder, because now there's a story, now there are martyrs, now there's blood on the ground, and humans are story creatures. We don't calculate purely on facts, we calculate on narratives. The narrative after Lexington is clear. Patriots died for freedom. The British fired on Americans. The conflict is real, immediate, unavoidable. Neutrality starts to feel like cowardice, or worse, like collaboration. Social pressure builds. In taverns, in churches, in town squares, people ask each other, "Where do you stand?" And one by one, people choose sides. Not everyone joins a revolution. Many remain loyal to Britain, some simply try to survive. But enough people join, and that's all a revolution needs. Not unanimous support, just enough support to make the cost of suppression exceed the benefit of control. By June, the Continental Congress authorizes an army. George Washington takes command. The revolution has structure now, organization, legitimacy in the eyes of its supporters, And this is a crucial transition from scattered resistance to organized movement, because scattered resistance can be suppressed. One village at a time, one rebel at a time, the authorities can hunt down and punish dissenters. But organized movements are different. When resistance has structure, suppressing it in one place just makes it stronger elsewhere. Execute one leader, 3 more emerge. Defeat one militia, 2 more form. The British find themselves in an impossible position. They can win battles. They do win battles. They have superior training, equipment, and at first funding, but they can't win the war, because the war isn't really a military conflict. It's a psychological conflict. The British need the colonists to accept British authority. The colonists refuse, and refusal, persistent, organized, widespread refusal, is remarkably hard to defeat. You can kill rebels, but you can't kill the idea that self-governance is possible. You can win territory, but you can't win hearts. You can occupy cities, but you can't occupy minds. This is why revolutions work when they work. Not because the rebels have better weapons, usually they don't. Not because the rebels have better strategy, often they don't. But because the rebels have changed the nature of the conflict. They've turned it from a military problem into a psychological problem. And psychological problems can't be solved with force. Force can change behavior temporarily, but it can't change belief. And revolutions are ultimately about belief. The belief that the current system is illegitimate. The belief that an alternative is possible. The belief that enough people share these beliefs to make action worthwhile. When these beliefs take root, when they spread, when they become widespread enough, the revolution has already won. The fighting is just working out the details. Feel your mind drifting now like clouds across a summer sky. Let these patterns of human behavior settle deep into your subconscious. Your breathing is slow, steady, peaceful. Let's cross the Atlantic now to France 1788. Paris glitters, the palace at Versailles dazzles, but beneath the glamour, pressure is building. Imagine you're a French peasant. You work a small plot of land. You give a portion of your harvest to the local lord. You pay taxes to the king. You pay tithes to the church. After all these obligations, you're left with barely enough to feed your family. You accept this. Your father accepted it. His father accepted it. This is the way of things. But then, something changes. Word spreads of events in America. Colonists overthrew the most powerful empire on earth. They wrote their own laws. They created a government based on representation, not birthright. This news is destabilizing, not because it tells you something you didn't know. You already knew you were suffering. You already knew the system was unfair, but it tells you something new. It doesn't have to be this way. This is the key that unlocks revolutionary consciousness. People can endure incredible suffering if they believe it's inevitable, if they believe it's natural, if they believe it's divinely ordained or just the way things are. But once they learn that others have chosen differently, have organized differently, have thrived under different arrangements, the suffering becomes intolerable. Because now it's not inevitable. It's a choice, someone else's choice, a choice being imposed on you. And that realization, that's gasoline waiting for a spark. The spark comes in 1789. King Louis XVI, desperate for money, calls the Estates General. This is a gathering of representatives from the 3 estates, clergy, nobility, and commoners. It hasn't met in 175 years. The king only calls it when he's desperate. and his desperation tells the people something important. He needs us more than we need him. The third estate, the commoners, arrive at Versailles expecting to negotiate. They have grievances, they have proposals, they have demands, but they also have respect for the process, for tradition, for the proper order of things. The king and nobility expect the third estate to play their traditional role, provide money, accept minimal reforms, go home. But something unexpected happens. The third estate refuses to play along. When the king orders them to meet separately, they refuse. When he orders them to leave, they stay. And here's a psychological turning point. The National Assembly, as they now call themselves, takes an oath. The tennis court oath, named for where they gather when locked out of their meeting hall. They swear not to separate until France has a constitution. Think about the audacity of this moment. These are not soldiers, they are lawyers, merchants, doctors, respectable men, men with property and families, and they're defying the king, not with weapons, not with violence, but with something more powerful, legitimacy. They're claiming that they, not the king, represent France. That sovereignty belongs to the people, not the crown. This is a complete inversion of the existing order, and inversions like this only work if enough people believe in them. The genius of the National Assembly is that they act as if they already have authority. And by acting that way, they create authority. Authority is performative. It's theatre. It requires actors playing their roles. The king acts kingly, so people treat him like a king. But what happens when someone else starts acting authoritative? When they speak with confidence? When they claim legitimacy, when they refuse to be cowed, others start treating them as legitimate too. This is how revolutions remake reality, not by destroying the old order first and then building something new, but by building the new order while the old order still exists, and letting people choose which one to obey. In June 1789, France has two competing sources of authority. The king, backed by tradition, by divine right, by centuries of precedent. And the National Assembly, backed by what? Ideas? Principles? The will of the people? These seem like thin reeds compared to the king's armies and wealth. But ideas have a power that armies don't. You can kill a rebel, but you can't kill an idea. You can occupy territory, but you can't occupy a principle. And the idea spreading through France is simple but revolutionary. People should govern themselves. This idea is viral. It spreads through pamphlets, through conversations, through the very air. And as it spreads, the calculation shifts in millions of minds. A shopkeeper in Paris hears about the National Assembly's defiance. He thinks, if they can refuse the king, why can't I refuse to pay the king's taxes? A soldier in the Royal Army hears the Assembly's rhetoric about the rights of man. He thinks, I am a man. Why am I taking orders to suppress other men like me? A noble woman in her salon hears philosophers debating natural rights. She thinks, if all men are created equal, what about women? What about my rights? One idea cascades into 1,000 questions, and questions once asked can't be unasked. July 14th, 1789. The Bastille. This fortress prison in Paris symbolizes royal tyranny. It holds only 7 prisoners, but that's not the point. The point is what it represents. When crowds surround it, demanding weapons, the governor faces an impossible choice. Surrender the fortress and admit the monarchy's weakness, or defend it and kill French citizens in the heart of Paris. He chooses to defend it. The crowd storms it. In the chaos, the governor is killed. The Bastille falls. News races through Paris, through France, through Europe. And everyone understands what it means. The symbols of the old order can be torn down. The people have power. The revolution is real. But here's what's often missed about that day. The Bastille doesn't fall because the crowd is stronger than the fortress. It falls because the soldiers inside decide not to fight to the death. It falls because when they look at the crowd, they see their brothers, their neighbors, their countrymen. It falls because the line between soldier and citizen has blurred. And when that line blurs, when the enforcer identifies more with the people than with the power structure is finished. This is the pattern we'll see repeated in every successful revolution. The moment the army refuses to fire on the people, the moment the police join the protesters, the moment the bureaucrat leaks the documents, the moment the guard opens the prison door, these are the moments that determine whether a revolution succeeds or fails. Not the bravery of the revolutionaries, though that matters, but the defection of the enforcers. Because power ultimately is enforced through people, and people can change their minds. Feel yourself sinking deeper now into comfort, into warmth, into the gentle embrace of approaching sleep. These stories are working on you in ways conscious thought cannot reach. Before we continue our journey through the psychology of revolution, take a moment to notice how you feel. There's something profound about understanding these patterns, isn't there? About seeing how power really works, about recognizing that the same psychological principles that toppled kings can be applied to any hierarchy, any system, any moment where someone claims authority they haven't earned. If these insights resonate with you, if you're the kind of ambitious person who thinks deeply about power, influence, and the forces that shape our world, consider sharing this story. Share it with someone who asks big questions, someone who refuses easy answers, someone who, like you, understands that success comes from understanding human nature at its deepest levels. A simple like, a share, a subscription. These help ideas spread, and ideas, as we're learning, are the most powerful force in human history, more powerful than any army, more lasting than any empire. Now, let's return to our journey through the moments when ordinary people discovered their extraordinary power. Travel with me now to the coldest February in memory, St. Petersburg, Russia, 1917. The First World War grinds into its third year. Millions of Russian soldiers have died. Millions more suffer in trenches, poorly equipped, poorly fed, poorly led. At home, the situation is worse. Bread lines stretch for blocks. Families burn furniture to stay warm. Children cry from hunger while their mothers stand in the snow, waiting for bread that may not come. The Tsar, Nicholas II, is at military headquarters far from the capital. He's convinced he's winning the war. His advisors don't dare tell him the truth. This is a pattern in collapsing regimes. The ruler becomes isolated, surrounded by yes men, fed pleasant lies instead of harsh truths. By the time they realize the danger, it's too late. February 23rd, 1917. International Women's Day. Textile workers, mostly women, walk out of the factories. They're not planning a revolution. They're just hungry, angry, tired of watching their children starve while the war devours their husbands and sons. They march through the streets shouting bread. Just that, not down with the Tsar, not revolution now, just bread. It's a simple demand, a human demand, the most basic need. And simplicity is powerful because when you're demanding something obviously reasonable, food for hungry children, anyone who refuses looks monstrous. The authorities order the women to disperse. They refuse. More workers join the march. By evening, 90,000 people fill the streets. The next day, 200,000. The pattern is familiar now. A small group acts. Others see them and think, if they can, I can. The group grows. But the authorities have a playbook too. Cossacks, fierce cavalry, troops known for brutally suppressing protests. They ride into the crowd. And here's where everything hinges. The Cossacks don't attack. Some smile at the protesters, some chat with them. One Cossack leans down and lets a woman hold his saber, laughing. Why? Think about the psychology here. These Cossacks are trained soldiers. They're ordered to disperse the crowd. They're perfectly capable of violence. But they're also human beings. And when they look at the crowd, they don't see enemies. They see their mothers, their sisters, their wives. They see women asking for bread for children. What kind of man attacks women asking to feed children? The Cossacks make a calculation, obey the order and become the villain in everyone's eyes, including their own, or disobey and retain their humanity. They choose humanity. And with that choice, the Tsarist regime is doomed. Because if the Cossacks won't attack protesters, if the ultimate enforcers refuse to enforce, what does a Tsar have left? Orders that aren't followed aren't orders. They're suggestions. Authority that isn't enforced isn't authority. It's a wish. The strikes spread. By February 25th, virtually every industry in St. Petersburg is shut down. The city is paralyzed. The Tsar orders the garrison to restore order. The garrison soldiers are mostly peasants in uniform. They look at the protesters and see themselves. Some units refuse to fire, others fire into the air. One unit, the Pavlovsky Regiment, mutinies entirely. They turn their weapons on their officers, and this is the cascade that ends empires. When one unit defects, others wonder, should we? When several units defect, the calculation shifts. Now staying loyal is a risky choice. You might be on the wrong side, the losing side. Self-interest aligns with conscience. Both say, join the people. By February 27th, whole regiments have mutinied. Soldiers and workers together seize government buildings, arsenals, police stations. The Duma, Russia's parliament, forms a provisional committee to maintain order, and in the factories and barracks, workers and soldiers form Soviets, councils where everyone has a voice, dual power, two governments claiming authority. We've seen this before in France. It's a revolutionary state, unstable. One must prevail. March 2nd, 1917. The Tsar's train is stopped by revolutionary soldiers. He's isolated. His commanders tell him the truth. The army won't fight for him. If he resists, there will be civil war and he'll lose. Nicholas II abdicates. 300 years of Romanov rule ends not with a grand battle, but with a pen signature in a railway car. He'd thought his power came from divine right, from tradition, from the throne itself. He learned, too late, that power came from millions of people choosing every day to obey. And once they chose differently, the throne was just a chair, the crown was just metal, the Tsar was just a man. Let's pause on this. Really feel it. An empire that had stood for centuries, that controlled the largest territory on earth, that commanded millions of soldiers, collapsed in 1 week, not because of years of planning, not because of a brilliant military strategy, but because soldiers refused to shoot women asking for bread. That's all it took, a refusal, a simple human refusal to commit an atrocity, and everything else followed. This teaches us something profound about the nature of power. Power looks solid, permanent, unshakable. The palace looks eternal, the throne looks immovable, the system looks inevitable. But it's all sustained by choice. Millions of small choices made every day by ordinary people. The choice to follow orders, the choice to enforce laws, the choice to accept the hierarchy. And when enough of those choices change, when enough people choose differently, the palace falls overnight. Your eyelids are so heavy now, your breathing so slow and deep. Let these truths sink into your bones. Let's move now to a place where revolution took a different form. India under British rule, the crown jewel of the empire. 300 million Indians governed by a few thousand British administrators and soldiers. The math seems impossible. How do so few control so many? The answer, they don't. Not really. They control the systems. And Indians run the systems. Indians police the streets. Indians collect the taxes. Indians staff the bureaucracy. Indians judge cases in British courts. Indians enforce British laws. The British Empire doesn't rule through force. It rules through participation. This is the genius and the vulnerability of any imperial system. Enter a thin man in a loincloth. Mohandas Gandhi. He's studied law in London. He's worked in South Africa. He understands how empires think, how they operate, where they're strong, and where they're weak. Gandhi sees something others miss. The British Empire is like a complex machine. It has many moving parts and all must work together. But what if the parts stopped moving? What if the machine simply stopped? You don't need to blow up the machine. You just need to withdraw your cooperation. In 1930, Gandhi announces he will walk to the sea and make salt. This sounds absurd, almost comical. The British have made salt production a monopoly. Indians must buy salt from the British, who tax it heavily. It's a regressive tax that hurts the poor most. Everyone needs salt. Everyone must pay. Gandhi will break this law by making salt from seawater. British officials laugh. Let the old man make his salt, who cares? But Gandhi understands something about symbols and psychology that the British don't. Salt isn't just salt. It's a metaphor. It's something every Indian needs, every Indian uses, every Indian must buy from the British. By making salt, Gandhi is saying, we can provide for ourselves. We don't need British permission to fulfill our basic needs. March 12th, 1930. Gandhi begins walking. He's 61 years old. The walk to the coast is 240 miles. It will take 24 days. As he walks, others join. Dozens become hundreds, become thousands. The march becomes a pilgrimage, a symbol of defiance that's also a symbol of self-respect. British authorities face a dilemma. Arrest him now before he reaches the sea? That makes him a martyr and proves the law is unjust. Why else arrest a man for walking? Let him make salt. That lets him break the law publicly and encourages others to do the same. They choose to wait. April 6, 1930. Gandhi reaches the sea at Dundee. He bends down, picks up a lump of salt, and holds it up. With that gesture, he breaks British law. And all across India, millions of people follow his example. They make salt. They sell salt. They give salt away. Suddenly, hundreds of thousands of Indians are criminals. And here's where Gandhi's genius becomes clear. The British must either arrest hundreds of thousands of people, which is impossible and makes them look tyrannical. Let the law be broken openly and publicly, which makes them look powerless. Either choice weakens them. This is strategic nonviolent resistance. Not passive, not weak. Strategic. Gandhi forces the British to choose between looking monstrous or looking weak. The British choose to look monstrous. They arrest over 60,000 people, including Gandhi. Prisons overflow. The bureaucracy groans. International attention focuses on India. And here's the key. Each arrest creates a story. A man arrested for making salt. A woman beaten for selling salt. A child jailed for possessing salt. These stories spread. They make the British look petty, cruel, unreasonable. They make the law look unjust, and when law looks unjust, people stop obeying it. Not just the salt law, all laws. The entire machinery of British rule depends on Indians obeying British laws. When that obedience erodes, when people start choosing which laws to follow, when the moral authority of the legal system collapses, the empire is finished. It doesn't happen overnight. The British hold on for another 17 years. But the psychological shift has occurred. The belief that sustained the empire, that British rule was legitimate, necessary, beneficial, has cracked. And beliefs once cracked are hard to repair. Let's go deeper into the psychology of what Gandhi accomplished. He reframed resistance from violent to moral. Violence plays into the empire's strength. The British army is powerful. If Indians use violence, the British can respond with greater violence and claim they're maintaining order. But non-violent resistance, that's different. When peaceful protesters are beaten, the violence reveals itself. The protester is the victim. The state is the aggressor. Public sympathy shifts. And empires need public sympathy. They need to be seen as legitimate, as civilized, as bringing order and progress. When that image cracks, when the world sees the violence behind the civilized facade, the empire loses its moral authority. And moral authority is what made ruling 300 million people with a few thousand soldiers possible in the first place. Gandhi also did something else crucial. He made resistance accessible. Not everyone can fight in a revolution. Not everyone can throw stones or face bullets. But everyone can refuse to buy salt. Everyone can make their own salt. Everyone can quietly, peacefully, without violence, stop cooperating with the system. This democratizes revolution. You don't need to be brave or strong or young or moral. You just need to say no. And when millions say no simultaneously, the system stops functioning. This is the deepest truth of power. It requires cooperation. Kings need subjects who obey. Empires need colonized peoples who participate. Dictators need citizens who follow rules. Take away that cooperation and power evaporates. Not slowly, not gradually, instantly. Because power was never real in the first place. It was belief, shared belief. And when the belief stops being shared, there's nothing left. Feel yourself drifting now deeper into understanding, deeper into rest. Your mind absorbing these patterns while your body releases into sleep. Let's move forward in time. To 1989, the Cold War's final days. Czechoslovakia has been under communist control for 40 years. The Prague Spring of 1968, a brief flowering of freedom, was crushed by Soviet tanks. Since then, one-party rule, secret police, censorship, fear. Václav Havel is a playwright. He writes plays the government bans. He speaks truths the government punishes. He's been in prison multiple times. In his essays, Havel writes about something he calls living in truth. In totalitarian systems, everyone participates in the lie. The government lies saying the system serves the people. The people lie saying they support the system. Everyone knows it's all lies, but everyone pretends not to know. This creates what Havel calls a post-totalitarian system, not sustained by terror alone, but by everyone's complicity in the fiction. The greengrocer puts a sign in his window, "Workers of the world, unite." Does he believe it? No. Does anyone think he believes it? No. So why does he put up the sign? Because that's what you do. Because not putting it up invites questions. Because going along is easier than resisting. And when everyone goes along, the system perpetuates itself. But Havel identifies the weakness. The system is built on lies, and lies are fragile. One person speaking truth can crack the whole edifice. Not immediately, not obviously, but the crack spreads. Because once one person stops pretending, others notice. And they think, if they can stop pretending, maybe I can too. November 1989. The Berlin Wall falls, the Soviet Empire is collapsing. In Prague, students gather on November 17th for a memorial march. It's officially sanctioned, just a commemoration of anti-fascist resistance from 1939. But in the climate of 1989, any gathering is dangerous. Any crowd might become something more. The march ends at Narodny Street. Riot police block the way. They order the students to disperse. The students sit down. They light candles. They hold up their hands to show they're unarmed. The police attack. Batons rise and fall, blood on cobblestones. Screams echo off old buildings. One rumor spreads. A student has been killed. The rumor is false, but it serves a purpose. It crystallizes outrage. It makes the abstract concrete. The next day, students strike, then actors, then workers. Within a week, 200,000 people fill Wenceslas Square. They're not violent, not destructive. They carry candles, they sing songs, and they do something simple but profound. They jingle their keys. The sound grows, thousands of keys jingling together, like bells, like rain, like chains breaking. It's symbolic. The keys say, we're going home. We're locking up this regime and going home. It's also practical. The sound is gentle but defiant, playful but serious. You can't arrest someone for jingling keys, but you can't ignore hundreds of thousands jingling keys in unison either. The government faces familiar choices. Violently suppress the protests and risk escalation, or negotiate and risk losing control. They choose negotiation because in 1989 the psychology has shifted. Soviet tanks aren't coming. Gorbachev in Moscow is allowing change. The ideological justification for communist rule has crumbled. The security forces know this. They're not defending a belief system anymore. They're defending men who will soon be powerless. Why risk your life for that? So when orders come to clear the square, they hesitate. And in that hesitation, the revolution is already won. November 24th, the entire communist leadership resigns. December 29th, Václav Havel, playwright, dissident, former prisoner, is elected president. The revolution took 6 weeks. It was peaceful. No one died after that first night. It became known as the Velvet Revolution. But why did it work? Several factors converged. External shift. The Soviet Union's collapse removed the threat of invasion, loss of belief. Even party members no longer believed in communism. They were going through motions. Unified opposition. The protest cut across all sectors of society, not just dissidents, but average people. Strategic nonviolence. The movement's peaceful nature made violent suppression unjustifiable. Defection of enforcers. Police and soldiers refused orders. But underneath all of this, the collective agreement to stop pretending. For 40 years, Czechoslovaks had participated in the lie. They'd pretended the system was legitimate. In November 1989, they stopped pretending. And without that pretense, the system had nothing. No legitimacy, no moral authority, no reason for anyone to obey. It was like a magic trick when the audience sees the wires. The illusion can't survive exposure. This is the fragility of authoritarian systems. They look strong because they control everything, but that control is shallow. It's imposed from above, not rooted in genuine consent. So when people withdraw consent, when they stop playing along, the control evaporates, like morning fog under sunlight, like ice under spring warmth, like belief under scrutiny. One moment it's there, solid, seemingly permanent. The next, it's gone, and everyone wonders how they ever believed it was real. Your breathing is so slow now, so peaceful. These truths are ancient truths, human truths. They live in your cells, your blood, your bones. We've journeyed through centuries now, through continents, through different cultures and different kinds of oppression. But have you noticed the pattern? Every successful revolution follows similar steps. Step 1. The breaking point. Suffering isn't enough. Humanity can endure incredible suffering if it seems inevitable. But when suffering is paired with awareness that it doesn't have to be this way, that others live differently, that the system is choice, not fate, that's when resentment turns to resistance. In America, the British across the ocean live free. Why not us? In France, the Americans created a republic. Why not us? In Russia, other nations have left this war. Why must we continue? In India, why? We outnumber the British thousands to 1. Why do we need their permission? In Czechoslovakia, the Berlin Wall has fallen. Why not our wall? The pattern comparison reveals injustice. Step 2. The first act of defiance. Someone refuses. Someone says no. Someone breaks the rule, crosses the line, defies the authority. It might be small, making salt, sitting at a lunch counter, walking across the street you're forbidden to use, or large, dumping tea in a harbour, storming a fortress, declaring independence. The size matters less than the symbolism. The act must be visible. It must be unambiguous. It must force others to choose. Do I approve of this defiance? Do I join it? Or do I support the system suppressing it? Neutrality becomes harder. Step 3. The contagion. The first act is crucial but insufficient. One person defying the system can be easily crushed. But revolutions don't need everyone. They need enough people. How many is enough? It varies. Sometimes 3.5% of the population actively participating is sufficient, because that 3.5% influences others, creates momentum, shift the calculation. The key is visibility. Each act of defiance must be seen, because humans are social creatures. We take cues from each other. When I see you resist and survive, my calculation shifts. Maybe I can resist too. When 10 people resist, 100 consider it. When 100 resist, 1,000 join. The growth isn't linear, it's exponential. Until suddenly, the resistors are the majority, or at least seem like the majority, and in politics, perception is reality. Step 4. The defection of the enforcers. This is the hinge point, the moment that determines success or failure. Every system of power has enforcers: police, soldiers, bureaucrats, people who carry out orders. When those people continue obeying orders to suppress resistance, revolutions fail. They're crushed. The participants are arrested, exiled, or killed. But when the enforcers refuse, when they defect, when they join the resistance or simply step aside, the system collapses immediately, because power without enforcement is just shouting. Orders without obedience are just noise. Authority without force is just opinion. Why do enforcers defect? Multiple reasons, often combined. Identification, they see themselves in the protesters. That's my sister, my neighbor, people like me. Morality. The order violates their conscience. I didn't join the army to shoot peaceful protesters. Calculation. The old regime is failing. Supporting it is risky. If the revolution wins, I'll be punished for what I did. Better to switch sides now. Loss of belief. They no longer think the system is legitimate. Why am I defending this? I don't even believe in it anymore. When enough enforcers think these thoughts, the regime is finished. Step 5. The collapse. Here's what's remarkable. The actual collapse is often sudden. Regimes that seemed unshakable crumble in days or weeks. The Tsar ruled for 300 years and fell in a week. The Berlin Wall stood for 28 years and opened in a night. The Soviet Union spanned continents and dissolved in months. Why so fast? Because the power was never real. It was sustained by collective belief. And collective belief can shift suddenly. One day, everyone believes, the next everyone sees through it. Like an optical illusion. Once you see the trick, you can't unsee it. The emperor has no clothes. And once everyone sees he's naked, the empire is over. Not literally instantly. There's still work to do. New systems to build, details to work out, but psychologically it's over. The old regime's authority is gone. And authority, once lost, is nearly impossible to reclaim. We're deep into the night now. Your body is resting. Your conscious mind is drifting. But your subconscious is absorbing these patterns. Patterns of power. Patterns of resistance. Patterns that apply not just to revolutions, but to every hierarchy you'll ever encounter. Every workplace with unjust policies. Every relationship with imbalanced power. Every internal voice that says you can't when you know you can. These are the same dynamics, playing out at different scales, and understanding them, truly understanding them at the level we're exploring tonight. That understanding is a form of power itself. If this journey has opened your eyes, if these insights feel valuable, share them, subscribe for more. Help these ideas spread. Because ideas, as we've learned, are the most powerful force in history. They topple empires. They liberate millions. They change everything. And they spread through sharing. Now, let's complete our journey. All of these stories, all of these historical moments, they're about collective action, about masses of people. But there's another kind of revolution, more personal, more immediate, more directly applicable to your life, the revolution within. Because the same dynamics we've explored, the psychology of obedience, the power of belief, the fragility of authority, they play out inside your mind. Think about it. You have internal authorities, voices that tell you what you can't do. Beliefs about your limitations, rules about who you are and what's possible for you. Where did these come from? Some from parents, some from teachers, some from past failures, some from society's messages about people like you. And you obey these internal authorities the same way subjects obeyed kings. not because you consciously choose to, but because they're the water you swim in, the air you breathe, the assumptions so deep you don't even notice them. I'm not the kind of person who, people like me don't, I could never. These are your internal kings, your internal tyrants, and they rule you the same way external tyrants rule populations, through belief. You believe these limitations are real, inevitable, true. But what if they're not? What if they're just stories? Stories you've been told, stories you've told yourself. Stories that have gone unquestioned for so long they feel like facts. But they're not facts, they're beliefs. And beliefs can change. This is where everything we've learned becomes practical. You don't need to wait for a mass movement to overthrow these internal tyrants. You can start your personal revolution right now. How? The same way political revolutions start. First, awareness. Notice the beliefs that limit you. Bring them into consciousness. Examine them. Why do I believe this? Where did this come from? Is it actually true? Most of the time, you'll find these beliefs are inherited, assumed, never tested. They're the intellectual equivalent of feudalism. This is how it's always been, so this is how it must be. But it doesn't have to be second comparison. Look at others who have done what you think you can't do. Not superhuman geniuses, regular people. People with similar backgrounds, similar challenges, similar starting points. If they did it, why can't you? This isn't about competition or envy. It's about expanding your sense of possibility. The same way news from America expanded French peasants' sense of political possibility. Stories of others' achievements can expand your sense of personal possibility. Third, small acts of defiance. You don't overthrow internal tyranny all at once. You start small. Break one small rule you've set for yourself. Do one small thing your limiting belief says you can't do. Speak up in one meeting where you usually stay silent. Try one thing you've convinced yourself you're bad at. The act itself almost doesn't matter. What matters is the psychological shift. You disobeyed the internal authority and you survived. That survival is information. It updates your model of reality. Maybe I can do this. Maybe the rule was wrong. Maybe I'm more capable than I believed. Fourth, momentum. Just like political revolutions, personal revolutions build momentum. One small success makes the next seem possible. One boundary crossed makes the next boundary less intimidating. And suddenly, you're doing things that 6 months ago seemed impossible. Not because you became a different person, but because you stopped obeying the beliefs that limited the person you always were. Fifth, the defection of your enforcers. In your internal world, your enforcers are habits, reflexes, automatic thoughts. They police your behavior, they enforce the old rules, they punish deviation. Who do you think you are? You'll embarrass yourself. People will judge you. You're not ready. These thoughts are your internal police force, and just like external police forces, they can defect. How? By recognizing them as thoughts, not truths. Thoughts are just mental events. They arise, they pass. They have no inherent authority. You don't have to obey them any more than French citizens had to obey the king. When a limiting thought arises, you can notice it, acknowledge it, and then choose differently. Thank you for sharing thought, but I'm going to act as if you're wrong and see what happens. And when you act despite the thought, and nothing terrible happens, that thought loses its power. Do this enough times and your internal police force stops showing up. The limiting beliefs go quiet. and you discover you're freer than you ever imagined. The parallel is exact. This isn't metaphor, it's the same psychological process. External revolutions overthrow external authorities by exposing them as illegitimate and withdrawing consent. Internal revolutions overthrow internal authorities the exact same way. Expose the limiting belief as just a belief, not a fact. Withdraw your consent to be governed by it, act despite it, and watch your internal empire crumble. Not all at once. There will be resistance, the old patterns will fight back. Just like fallen regimes sometimes attempt counter-revolutions. But if you persist, if you keep acting from freedom rather than fear, the old order can't survive. Because it never had real power. It only had your belief. And your belief has withdrawn. Feel this truth settling into your cells now. Feel your breathing deep and slow. You are drifting into sleep, but these ideas are working in you, rewiring you, liberating you. Here's the final truth about revolutions. They're never really finished. Political revolutions don't end when the old regime falls. That's just the beginning. Then comes the hard work of building new systems, of creating structures that embody the values the revolution fought for. And often, sadly, revolutions betray themselves. The new boss becomes like the old boss. The liberators become oppressors. The cycle repeats. France's revolution devolved into the terror, then Napoleon's empire. Russia's revolution created a new tyranny, arguably worse than the Tsar's. Many revolutions fail in the building phase. Why? Because tearing down is easier than building up. Because power corrupts, even revolutionaries. Because the skills needed to overthrow a system are different from the skills needed to create a better one. This is the eternal challenge. The same is true for personal revolutions. You can overthrow your limiting beliefs. You can act with courage. You can expand beyond your old boundaries. But then what? Who do you become in that new freedom? What do you build? How do you avoid recreating the same patterns in new forms? These are the questions ambitious people must grapple with. It's not enough to reject the old. You must create the new, and creation requires vision. What are you building? Not just what you're escaping from, but what you're moving toward. Discipline. Freedom without structure becomes chaos. You need systems, habits, practices that support your new identity. Humility. You will make mistakes. You will sometimes slip back into old patterns. That's not failure. That's being human. Community. Revolutions are social. Even personal revolutions need support. Find people who encourage your growth, who challenge your backsliding, who model the person you're becoming. Purpose. Why are you doing this? Not just for your own liberation, but for what? What will you do with your freedom? Because freedom without purpose is just drift. And ambitious people aren't content to drift. You want to matter, to contribute, to build something meaningful. So the personal revolution must lead somewhere. The political revolutions we've studied teach this lesson too. The American Revolution succeeded not just in overthrowing the British, but in building something new. A constitutional republic based on representation. The Indian independence movement succeeded not just in expelling the British, but in building the world's largest democracy. The Velvet Revolution succeeded not just in ending communism, but in creating a functioning democracy. The revolutions that fail are the ones that only know how to destroy, not build. The same is true for you. Overthrowing your internal limitations is crucial, but it's step one. Step two is building a life that reflects your values. serves your purpose, contributes to something larger than yourself. That's the real revolution, not rebellion for its own sake, but transformation in service of becoming who you're meant to be. We're approaching the end of our journey through the night. Your body is deeply relaxed now. Your mind is hovering between waking and sleep. This is where learning goes deepest, where insights bypass conscious resistance and root themselves in your subconscious. So let's review what we've learned. Power is permission. It looks solid, but it's actually fluid. It looks permanent, but it's actually maintained moment by moment by millions of people choosing to obey. Revolutions work when people withdraw permission, not through individual heroism, but through collective realization. When enough people simultaneously see through the illusion. The key moment is when enforcers defect, when the people supposed to maintain the system refuse to do so, when soldiers won't shoot, when police join protesters, when bureaucrats leak documents. The same dynamics play out internally. Your limiting beliefs are your internal tyrants. Your automatic thoughts are your internal police, and you can overthrow them the same way populations overthrow external powers. Revolution is ongoing. It's not a single event, but a continuous process of questioning authority, of choosing freedom, of building something better. And here's what this means for you as an ambitious person drifting into sleep. You have more power than you think. The systems that seem immovable can move. The authorities that seem absolute can be questioned. The limitations that seem inevitable can be transcended, not through force, not through violence, not through confrontation, but through clarity, through awareness, through the simple, profound act of withdrawing your consent from anything that doesn't serve you. This works in your career, when you realize a job that diminishes you only has power if you stay. This works in relationships, when you recognize a dynamic that harms you only continues if you allow it. This works in your mind, when you see that a belief that limits you only operates if you believe it. You are not powerless, you never were. You just forgot that power is permission, and permission can be withdrawn right now, tonight, as you sleep. Your subconscious is integrating these truths. Tomorrow you'll wake up subtly changed. You'll see authorities differently. Not as inevitable, but as agreements you can renegotiate. You'll see your own limitations differently. Not as facts, but as beliefs you can revise. You'll see possibility differently. Not as rare and distant, but as ever-present and accessible. Because revolutions aren't rare historical events. They're the natural result of a simple human capacity, the capacity to say no, to refuse, to resist, to reimagine, and you have that capacity right now. In your career, you can refuse work that doesn't align with your values. In your relationships, you can refuse treatment that doesn't honor your dignity. In your mind, you can refuse beliefs that don't serve your growth. This isn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. This is discernment, this is wisdom, this is self-respect. And it's how ambitious people create extraordinary lives, not by following the rules everyone else follows, but by questioning which rules deserve to be followed, not by obeying every authority, but by determining which authorities are legitimate, not by accepting every limitation, but by testing which limitations are real. This is a revolution within. The overthrowing of inherited beliefs, the liberation of your authentic self, the building of a life that's truly yours. And it starts with a simple recognition. The key has always been in your hand. The cell door was never locked. The chains were never real. You were always free. You just needed to notice. And now you have. Sleep deeply now, revolutionary. Let these truths work in you through the night. Let them dissolve old patterns and create space for new possibilities. Tomorrow you wake up knowing what successful revolutionaries throughout history have known. That change begins with a decision. That power rests on belief. That belief can shift in an instant. And that instant can be now. Sweet dreams, ambitious one. You are more powerful than you know. More free than you imagine. More capable of transformation than you dare believe. Until tomorrow, when your revolution continues. Breathe deep, rest well. And remember, the only unbreakable chains are the ones you forget you're wearing. Tonight you've remembered. Tomorrow you act. And everything changes. Good night.